welcome Virtual Space Hero community to our first LinkedIn Live after our summer break 2022. And I do know this was a long one. I was really offline for 1.5 months, and this is the first time I appear again online here on LinkedIn. And to be fair, it was really a good break. So sometimes we are so connected to the online discussion in LinkedIn that I really feel overwhelmed, and it was good for me and my brain and my family and my balance to disconnect for 1.5 months. Back, we are here in August, and the stage is filled of the Virtual Space Hero LinkedIn Lives. Until the end of the year, we are fully booked with all topics around remote and hybrid work. And I'm really very excited because today we are touching upon a topic that we have not been talking in detail yet. It is about office space. So we do know that due to hybrid work and virtual work, office space requirements in terms of how much do we need, but also in terms how should they look like, have been changing over the past decade. I myself, as a researcher, have been looking into the developments, particularly in what employees are expecting from office spaces and what we do need also from a neuroscience perspective. What do we need from an office space so that we are able to work productively? Is it still the one office with closed doors, or did that change? And I'm more than happy because today I'm talking with one of the entrepreneurs and masterminds when it comes to rethinking where we work and how that looks like. And I'm very happy to welcome on the Virtual Space Hero LinkedIn Live stage with me, Amina Moreau from Radious. Hi there.
Hi, thanks very much for having me.
Hi, Amina. It is a great pleasure to have you with us. And I would love to start with the question, how did you get into that remote work or new work discussion? What's the term that you favor?
Oh, there's so many terms being thrown around these days, it's hard to decide. And I hope that we can talk about some of those terms and how they're actually being used incorrectly. I would say that I prefer, uh, you know what, it's too big a discussion, I think. But I would say that lately I've been using the term distributed work as opposed to remote because I think there's a lot of confusion actually around what remote work actually means. And I feel like distributed work is a little bit more precise of a term, but we can get into all of that a little bit later. But I got into this, well, first of all, even well before the pandemic, as an employer, as somebody that also worked from home most days of the week. I was always a fan of working from anywhere and the flexibility that it affords. But during the pandemic, when the shift obviously became much more widespread, it occurred to me that on one hand, working from home and working in a distributed fashion has a lot of upsides, but there are also some downsides. Nothing's perfect. And I became very, very interested in how to mitigate the downsides and leverage the upsides as much as possible. And so, without going into my whole life story, that's sort of a nutshell of how I got into this conversation a little bit more deeply.
Oh, that sounds interesting. But Amina, I need to ask you, so, but what's in a nutshell? 3 sentences about your background, where do you come from, what have you been doing, and how did you move to that discussion? Again, sorry.
I'm a serial entrepreneur. This is all I have ever done is create companies. And it wasn't necessarily in the life plan, but I had an idea back when I was in university, and it was one of those ideas that I wanted to chase after. And that was my first company, which still exists today. And I realized that I'm the type of person that when I see a problem, I want to be able to fix it. And I know that I can't fix it, most problems anyway, not on my own, and it takes a team. And so I've basically been building startups for my whole career, and now I'm building Radious, which is my fifth company. And it is all about the future of work and creating new pathways and new possibilities in how we work. And I'm extremely excited about it.
That sounds fantastic. And I really believe that the concept of radius, where we're going to dive into in a bit, is very, very, very in innovative. So I really like that. But let me ask you a question. We called our today's session about the misconceptions in the future of office space conversation. And you already said there are misconceptions about the wording remote and distributed work. Give us some clarity. What are the terms or the definitions that you like to use or work with?
Yeah. So the reason why I didn't say that I love remote work and I said distributed work is because I actually think that the world doesn't yet have a clear definition of what remote work is. But I also don't think that the world realizes just how differently various people use the term. Over the course of the pandemic, remote work has changed drastically. In 2020, remote work and working from home were synonyms because we were stuck in lockdowns. We weren't allowed, it wasn't safe to work anywhere but in isolation in your home. And so I believe that for the first year of the pandemic, we were using the terms working from home and remote work interchangeably. Now in 2022, I believe that it's not so much that it's incorrect, it's just that it's incomplete. That working from home is just one facet of remote work. But not everybody has switched their thinking yet. And so what's happening is that many people who find pain points in working from home, either that isolation or burnout or having distractions, if they think that working from home and working remotely are the same things, then they generalize those pain points of working from home to the rest of remote work. And they conclude sometimes that remote work is just riddled with problems. Well, of course, if you look at it that way. But if you recognize that remote work can be done in 1,000 different ways, and working from home is simply one slice of that pie, then all of a sudden, a ton of opportunities open up. So what I would like to propose is a global unified definition of what remote work is. And I think it really depends on whether you consider the word remote to mean away from people, or if you equate it with being away from a central office. And I would like to propose that we define remote work as away from a central office. Because if it's away from people, then of course it's going to feel lonely. But if it's away from a central office, then you could be away from a central office, but with people in person. So you could be in a park, in a coffee shop, in a co-working space, in a Radious space. You could be virtually anywhere. But if it's away from people, then you've got all kinds of negativity there. So I would like to suggest that we really examine how we're using these words and start becoming a little bit more precise about it. Because I think that if we continue with these misconceptions, we're going to miss out on large opportunities. And if we do so, then we might actually end up crafting remote and hybrid policies that are perhaps even damaging to our workforce if we don't really understand the nuances.
I find it really interesting, the distinguishing factor that you're bringing into the conversation, even though we can also think like that remote work, it doesn't mean that you're away from people or only because you're not physically with them, right? So for some people that might be even okay that I'm not physically connected with my team or with anybody and I'm working really alone, but that might be something that is working for some folks out there. Amina, you have been in discussion about new ways of working, future of work for some time. So what is that you see changing, and particularly in the discussion around office spaces?
Well, now that we're 2.5 or so years into the pandemic, there have been massive shifts in how people are thinking about returns to the office and the viability of working from home in the long term. I believe that towards the end of 2020, a lot of people were touting the benefits of working from home, but I think a lot of them hadn't started to feel that burnout yet because they hadn't had enough time in their homes in isolation to really start feeling it yet. Now that we're 2.5 years in, many people are experiencing those pain points of working from home that you just wouldn't really encounter after just a few weeks or months. But likewise, it takes time for habits to develop in anybody. And we've developed habits over the last 2.5 years in working from home and having the convenience of walking 30 seconds over to the next room, and that is our commute versus potentially 30 minutes when driving to a central office. So in response, I've seen individuals and companies change the way that they think about where and also when they work, but I think asynchronous work is a whole other topic we could dive into. But what I see for the future is a bit of a bell curve. I think that what's going to happen, and what's already starting to happen, is that on one side of the bell curve, you're going to have a minority of companies, like Tesla, like Goldman Sachs, for example, that force a return, that are pretty strict about it. Then on the other end of the spectrum, you're going to have the complete opposite, where some companies go 100% remote, whether they never had an office to begin with, or they are reducing or even completely eliminating their office space and going fully remote or fully distributed. But then there's the middle of the bell curve, and that's going to be the majority of companies that try to find some healthy balance of hybrid. And still, to this day, we don't have a very good definition of hybrid because I think it means something different for every company. But a mix of in the central office or working from home or working in third places. And in my view, the smart companies, the ones that are going to come out on top, are the ones who offer the greatest flexibility. And not just saying you have to return 2 days a week and then you can work anywhere else 3 days a week. But the ones that offer full freedom to choose, I think they're going to be the ones that come out on top in the end. So I think we may have lost Barbara for a moment. Let me just double check. It seems as though maybe we lost her for a minute. So I know that she had some other questions for me that she had posted down towards the bottom of the invitation of our LinkedIn Live here. So she's asked, how did office space change? How did the needs of employees change? Is another question that I know she was going to ask me. So how did the needs of employees change when it comes to their office surroundings? Oh, Barbara, you're back.
Amina, you're the best. I knew that you were picking up on all the questions that I wanted to ask you while I was almost going for a coffee or something. Internet broke down totally. So thanks a lot for taking over.
Sure. So did you have any other follow-up questions before we dive into the next one about employee desires?
I would love to dive into that one because I remember that we were talking about it before. So what is your opinion on that when we think about the needs of employees and how they were changing when it comes to office surroundings?
Mm-hmm. I think it goes back to how when we were all in lockdown, some people loved it. Not having to commute and having the convenience, being able to be with their kids. Some people hated it, right? Because those same kids, they were home from school and you had to make sure that they were still being schooled. And among the countless distractions and various other pain points of working from home, there were some people that thrived in those environments and there were those who couldn't wait to get back to the office. But for a lot of folks, a lot of people have barriers to commuting. And not only that, but I've been hearing a lot of stories about people who do actually make the commute, who are finding working from home unsatisfying, who do drive back to the central office, but once they get there, none of their colleagues are there.
Mm,
or none of the people that they need to talk to are there. Perhaps they're other colleagues, perhaps they're customers or clients, and so they're hopping on Zoom and they're thinking to themselves, well, I could have just been on Zoom at home. Why am I here? And so it seems as though right now the number one pain point associated with working from home is isolation for
mm,
both employees and employers. I think that despite the fact that there's not a lot that companies and employees see eye to eye on right now, the one thing that they do agree on, whether they realize it or not, is that in-person interaction is valuable to have at least some of the time. Not all the
mm,
time, but we're social beings and that's never going to change. But aligning on how to make it happen has been the tricky part. And it's why we've seen the great resignation. And now we're starting to see the great sell off with a lot of companies getting rid of their office space. And so I think that it's time to get creative on how we address the pain points of the office and the pain points of working from home and find solutions that address those and bring the best of both worlds.
mm, mm. Absolutely. And Amina, we have seen the trend of where we are going to work already over the past decades, also with the uprise of co-working spaces. But
Right.
there is Radius, and you and your company are coming in with a totally innovative concept that is different to co-working, but similar. So how would you differentiate and describe what you are bringing to that remote work, distributed work discussion?
Sure thing. So it's similar to co working in the sense that it's a third place that's not the home, not the traditional office, and you can book it on demand, which means you're not paying for a 1 or 5 or 10 year lease. You simply pay for space when you need it, and you don't pay for space when you don't. So those are the similarities, but that's basically where they stop. The difference is that with a co working space, you're typically going to a centrally located building. That building is large enough to host many other companies. And so when you're going there, you're likely to be surrounded by strangers, which may be something that you want because maybe you want to meet new people. But if you're looking for privacy, you're looking for quiet, but you're looking for some work life separation and seeing your colleagues again without necessarily being surrounded by other companies, that's when you might need a different solution. And so, what Radius is offering is a close to home, private way to get together with people and to get work life separation. So, the way that the model works, it's very similar to Airbnb, where we take homes, apartments, condos, guest houses in people's backyards, and we outfit them with great workplace amenities like meeting spaces, whiteboards, fast Wi Fi, AV equipment if you're doing a slide presentation, for example. And they're listed on our website where you can browse listings in your area, in your neighborhood, even find a space that suits your needs and book it for the day. So if you just need a solo escape for yourself, for your own mental health, you can book a tiny home that has a sit stand desk and fast Wi-Fi and get out of the house, but maybe only walk 3 to 5 minutes because it's right there in your neighborhood. But maybe you're doing an offsite meeting with 15 colleagues from your company and you need a space that's big enough to accommodate, and you need, let's say, to do a presentation, but then you want to be able to perhaps play some team building games in the backyard. Well, you can
Mm,
book a space for that too. But know that you have the privacy because you're the only company there. And because we have spaces that are distributed all across cities, you can find one that's really conveniently located for as many people as possible. So it's an entirely new model. My dream is instead of companies having these centrally located offices that people have to drive to, we're turning the model on its head and we're bringing the office right into your neighborhood instead.
that sounds fantastic. I also heard a podcast, I think a few months ago, about micro co-working spaces or places, which is similar but still different. It's just that we don't have those big co-workings, but rather also in smaller neighborhoods, smaller co-workings that are maybe not that typical big office building anymore, but slightly different. I love the
Mm-hmm.
idea of Radius. And where did you start, and how are people picking up on the concept?
Mm. Well, the idea for the concept came to me in the middle of 2020 when everybody was in lockdowns, myself included. And actually, it came to me because I'm an Airbnb host. And so I was having some pain points in the middle of the pandemic, namely not really wanting to wash strangers' linens, especially during a pandemic. That's an intimate exercise. And so my partner and I, we started brainstorming, well, how can we as Airbnb hosts resume hosting in a way that feels safe? Well, we'd have to get rid of laundry. And in order to do that, we would have to get rid of overnight stays. And so we just started brainstorming, and it occurred to us, well, if we took our space that was at the time outfitted more for sleeping and vacationing, and if we outfitted it with faster Wi-Fi, with a sit-stand desk, and made it a great retreat for one or two people, then we could just rent it out to our neighbors for the day who need to get a productive day of work done. And we started doing that, and the response was overwhelming, not just from working professionals, but from the hosting community as well, because it turned out that a lot of these Airbnb hosts, they were having similar pain points. And it was in the fall of 2020 that we started talking to companies about their priorities, because at the time we had started reading all of these headlines about companies announcing permanent remote and hybrid policies, and companies spending big dollars on letting leases lapse. For example, Pinterest spent almost $90 million just to cancel a lease. My goodness, that was a huge signal that flexible work is here to stay. And so we started to talk to companies and learn about what their priorities are. And that's when we learned that in-person collaboration for the long term was going to be the number one need. Companies wanted to have people get together again, but didn't want to force them to commute to a central office. And so the uptake has been overwhelming. And I believe you know that we've launched in Portland, Oregon to begin with, and we've just recently expanded into our second city. And but that expansion into the second city is really just our first step towards national and eventually global expansion. We basically want to be offering this to everybody around the world that can work in remote settings.
And this sounds fantastic. And I believe there's a huge potential. Just look at me. I'd be happy to have a Radious with good Wi-Fi today near me, right?
So I noticed that you popped off for a minute. Is it an internet issue?
Totally. I don't know what's going on. I'm in the countryside, but still my internet should be good. Anyways, I love the idea of Radius and also how you're developing. And I love the idea of going globally and internationally. I think there's a huge need. For example, if I'm looking here in Austria, we are currently in Austria, and Austria has localized in the bigger cities, there are the co-workings, right? But even then, if we look more into country parts in the countryside, not so close to the city, there are no co-workings, and people would need to commute again for 45 minutes to get to a big co-working. And so there is really a huge need, and what I see, at least here in the Austrian market. And I'd love to see, of course, Radius growing and also joining internationally. Here our needs helping us.
Thank you. Yes, that's exactly the point. Co-working spaces and offices, they're not focused on the suburbs, not nearly as much. They're centrally located. And so imagine you could walk 3 doors down to your neighbor's guest house turned office who maybe isn't having Wi-Fi issues. And we actually just last week, we had a very similar use case where at 10 p.m. we got a booking from a woman who had found out that the next day her internet was going to be out due to construction in the neighborhood. And so she booked one of our spaces. And it wasn't for any sort of in-person meetings. It was simply a utilitarian solution to an internet problem. She booked a space, she did all of her Zoom calls, and then she went home. And it was easy peasy. But the point was also that it was close to where she lived.
Yeah,
So it was
absolutely.
convenient.
Absolutely. I love that. I mean, it is a great concept. I wish you the best of luck to grow nationally and internationally. And I hope there are also going to be people who are watching this LinkedIn Live, whether it's live or afterwards, that are connecting with you to exchange and also see and follow Radious on LinkedIn. Amina is tagged in the event. You can connect with her there. And I want to thank you again to make time in your calendar to connect with me and to take over while I was always hopping on and off due to my internet connection. Amina, a big, big pleasure having you here with me.
Same here. Thanks very much for having me. Great chatting with you.
Thanks a lot, Amina. And you know, I have a small virtual cocktail prepared backstage, so I'm joining you in a bit there. Thank you very much.
See you there.
Thank you very much, Virtual Space Hero community, for your patience. It seems that my internet is telling me, well, get yourself another setup for the next LinkedIn Live, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm thanking you for the messages that we have received over the summer, and we're picking up on the suggestions for more LinkedIn Lives, also about the topic of office space. Today we were starting with Amina, one of the big innovators in the field, with a different concept that is definitely changing the market. So thanks a lot for your suggestions, also in terms of speakers to be on the stage. We will follow up with all of you today. Don't forget to become a virtual space hero and have a beautiful morning, afternoon, or evening. Bye.